As you see on your agenda, usually we wrap up the summit with an annual report of the activities of the Pinellas County Historic Preservation Board. Just want to run through that real quick. Thanks for hanging out with us all day long. There is a little bit of reception, and I believe the vendors will be in the gallery for a little bit longer after I'm done with my presentation. But again, it's National Historic Preservation Month. That's why we hold the summit in the month of May, because it is National Historic Preservation Month. This is something created back in 2005 by the National Trust for Historic Preservation and the National Park Service. The Florida Trust has participated in National Preservation Month, and at local governments we also participate in National Historic Preservation Month, along with nonprofits and some for-profit businesses. So the Pinellas County Historic Preservation Board is basically, as a certified local government, our historic preservation program is certified in the eyes of the Florida Division of Historical Resources and the National Park Service. There's basically 4 things we are to do as being a certified historic preservation program. One is to survey and inventory our historic resources. We have on the master site file, which is our statewide inventory of historic resources. For Pinellas County alone, we have 14,619 resources recorded. That is the 6th most in the state of Florida. So for the second smallest county, that's pretty good, having the 6th most, in my opinion. The lion's share, 14,089 are these above-ground resources. What do I mean by above-ground resources? Buildings, structures such as bridges, subdivision gates, and the like, linear features, roadways, railroads. So you think we're doing pretty good. So if you look at the little map there, those blue dots represent what are currently listed on the master site file. One of our challenges is as being a certified historic preservation program, we are to conduct surveys. The expectation for architectural above ground resources is that we survey everything 50 years of age or older. So when you begin looking at Pinellas County, we have over 202,000 buildings that were built before 1976, because we're getting to the place right now where 1975 will be that 50-year landmark. So subtract those 14,000 properties from the master site file, we have 188,000 buildings yet to survey. Considering we surveyed in the past 40 years, on average, 400 buildings a year, that'll take 473 years to complete. I think we have to come up with a new methodology. And the red dots on the little map there represent the buildings that have not been surveyed, in that it's pretty much an edict. Luckily, we do have in our county 24 municipalities as well to assist us. Also, we are looking at below ground resources, and that means basically cemeteries and archaeological sites. On the master site file, we have 530 that are below ground resources. And more of these cemeteries and archaeological resources are being revealed in media coverage. This is a screen capture of a news story in Clearwater of the elementary school that was built on top of the African American cemetery in Clearwater. So we're finding those 3, 4, 5 cemeteries. Melissa Wiley was talking earlier about that Abandoned Cemeteries Act that was passed at the Florida legislature this year. There'll be some funding associated with it. There'll be a statewide committee. There'll be 3 staff people. That will hopefully allow us to catch up on something that I think is woefully inadequately understood, is our abandoned cemeteries or lost cemeteries or cemeteries that need to be documented and protected. And these are sacred grounds, and so also strategies for their preservation and protection. So the second responsibility we have at the Historic Preservation Board is to designate, once we've inventoried, we have the ability to recognize and designate these historic resources. We have at our disposal the National Register of Historic Places in our county. So the cream of the crop, the top, is a National Historic Landmark. We have one National Historic Landmark that's the Safety Harbor site in Felipe Park, which is the site basically of the native village of Tocobaga. There's Spanish reports and accounts. Several conquistador parties reached the village of Tocobaga, and in fact there was an outpost that was stationed at Tocobaga. 30 priests and soldiers were stationed there as a Spanish outpost. When the resupply ship arrived to provide provisions for this outpost, every single soldier and priest were found dead on the ground, and the village had been abandoned. So that's part of our early turbid history. We have 66 individual National Register listings, 10 National Register districts with 7,695 contributing properties. That's a total of 7,762 properties that are significant, that are designated. Just because you're listed on that Florida Master Site File does not mean you're significant or designated. That is the inventory. From that inventory, we seek out these designations. But if you look at that, more than half of our properties on the Master Site File are designated as historically significant. If you're not that cream of the crop nationally significant, you're either statewide designated for statewide importance or for local importance. Also, we have the ability with our, we're a certified local government. There's 6 municipal certified local governments as well. Petersburg, Tarpon Springs, Dunedin, St. Pete Beach, and the tiny communities of Gulfport and Bel Air. This means you've been vetted in terms of historic preservation ordinance, a historic preservation board, and a staff person dedicated to that board, such as I am for our Pinellas County Historic Preservation Board. That means you also have the ability to designate properties locally by ordinance. In Pinellas County, we have 15 resources that are designated a historic district. Here are some photos and examples of that. Fort DeSoto on the upper, as you're looking at it right, lower right is downtown Palm Harbor that we just heard the presentation on. Upper left is the Ozona Village Hall and the Palm Harbor Museum, yay. The Pinellas Register of Historic Resources. In Chapter 38 of the Pinellas County Code, we have the ability, and it's never been created, but we have recently contracted with the University of Florida to create the Pinellas Register of Historic Resources. This will allow us to have at the local level on hand as a planning tool, basically a geodatabase that will allow us access to information like the master site file at the state level. We'll have this information available at the county level for all jurisdictions. Starting with our certified local governments, we will be working on creating this Pinellas Register of Historic Places. What will be on that? It'll be those buildings that are 50 years of age or older. Doesn't mean they're significant, but National Register listed properties, those locally designated properties. I can't tell you, although I can tell you exactly what's in the unincorporated locally designated, I really don't have any idea what is designated in those other 6 municipalities. This database will allow us all to understand what is designated. Also, recently, 2 years ago, Resilient Florida legislation passed by the Florida legislature creates kind of this conversation about what are communities calling as their critical historical and cultural assets. It is defined as one of the subgroups in that legislation. Just because it's listed in the National Register does not mean that community might consider that a critical asset. And when we begin looking at the effects of a Cat 5 storm surge at King Tide and what effect and how that affects county, we need to understand this from an emergency management response perspective, from a resiliency perspective, and we are joining forces with our municipalities in terms of getting that inventory established, activating the Pinellas Register for Historic Resources with access to that database for all representatives from all the municipalities as well as county departments, so we can better understand if in the event we were hit by a hurricane. Okay, so that whole myth about the Indian legend about Tocobaga and well, guess what? In 1848, a horrible hurricane hit Pinellas County. That platform mound I talk about at the village of Tocobaga, well, Odette Felipe, one of the first European settlers in Pinellas County, he and his family and his enslaved individuals huddled on top of that platform mound because it was the highest point on their plantation. As 40%, archaeologists say, 40% of that mound eroded into the bay. Must have been a hell of a hurricane. 1921, they call it the Tarpon Springs hurricane. Huge damage, and Damage in 1921 was in the millions of dollars, so think about that in terms of what that would translate into today. So, that little microclimate story, the story of we're protected by the Indian legend, that sort of thing. Yeah, that's a great thing to think about, but we really do need to plan and anticipate and impact. And if it's not going to be a hurricane, what is it going to be? Sea level rise, right? We are experiencing sea level rise. So we want to get our ducks in a row, understand what is out there from a historic resource perspective, and designate what is important so we can have those conversations about what we can. This is kind of what we want to construct in terms of this Pinellas Register of Historic Resources. Fairly ambitious task. The county is currently just embarked on, the Google car has the camera on top and runs up and down, and you go on to Google Street View and you can see those wonderful images of the street. The county's just got a grant and has just started sending a car up and down the street with a terrestrial LiDAR scanner on top of it. Not a camera, a terrestrial LiDAR scanner. We will have a three-dimensional representation of every building facing every street in the special flood hazard area, those areas that are prone in that map that were all underwater in the blue. We will have that type of data and information, and then take a software that allows for flood modeling, and you can model that sea level rise. You can model what an impact of a Cat 1, Cat 3, Cat 5 storm would look like on your property, in your business district. You name it, in those flood hazard areas, we'll have that information, 5 terabytes of data. It'll be available in about 2 years. It's a long, huge project, but it will inform our vulnerability assessments, and that will be critical in us understanding what we're facing and use it as a management tool, not only for historic preservation, but for many other applications as well. All right, the third task that the Preservation Board has is to preserve and protect significant historic resources. Typically, that's done with designated properties through a certificate of appropriateness review. That's that permit you get for the changes, typically to the exterior of a building. This past year, we've had our board review 3 projects. And administratively, for smaller things, smaller changes to buildings, I have personally reviewed 5 and conducted administrative review on 5 projects for those designated historic resources in the unincorporated area. Each one of those certified local governments for those 6 municipalities are doing the same sort of thing. Also, our board has a responsibility with Bay Pines through the National Historic Preservation Act, Section 106, to review any changes. The Bay Pines Veterans Hospital campus is a National Register district, so we have an agreement and arrangement to review any project that they propose on the campus. Recently, we looked at the construction of a credit union on the campus, and a new X-ray hospital clinic that they want to put on the campus. And so we, as the Preservation Board, have input and participation in that as part of the federal government Section 106 procedure. All right, finally, the 4th responsibility of our Preservation Board is public education, outreach, and promotion. The board has had a little bit of money each year to spend on Florida historical markers. Here's our latest one, the North Greenwood African American Cemetery in Clearwater. It was a great ceremony and turnout for the dedication of that historical marker. And I meant to bring a copy up, but Cindy, could you grab a marker brochure and wave it in the air? If we got a few copies left, there we go. Thank you, David. This is a brand new publication, literally off the press yesterday. We'll have more copies next week. We have a few copies left back there. All 34 historical markers that are part of the Florida Historical Marker Program are in that publication. And we have four more pending in terms of new historical marker applications. So including, yes, the Hartley House. I know. Tom, get off your butt and get that submitted to the state, would you? But anyways, that's part of that outreach, promotion, education. Heritage Village, we have representatives from Heritage Village today. That is one of our wonderful learning centers that tells you the story of history of buildings in Pinellas County. It's just part of a program, Weeden Island Preserve. That whole cultural story is part of the natural story at Weeden Island Preserve. That's things the county are doing to promote publication, heritage education, and outreach. And We also host a summit every year, the Preservation Summit. And so bringing it to conclusion, full circle, thank you for attending the Preservation Summit today and Expo. Take a few minutes to check out the tables out back, and thanks again for coming out, and I appreciate your participation. Thank you.